All right, let's dive right into this explainer and explore how one family wove themselves into the cultural and industrial tapestry of New England. When we think about history, it is so incredibly easy to get entirely lost in the grand, sweeping narratives, right? The powerful presidents, the decisive wars, those massive economic booms. But true history, the kind of actually built the world we live in today, is woven by everyday people. Focusing on the daily grind and the triumphs of ordinary citizens often gives us a much truer, frankly less sanitized version of our past than any textbook summary. So today, we're going to trace the threads of a remarkably enduring family journey. So how exactly does one family embody the American Industrial Revolution? Well, to really get a grip on those massive historical shifts of the 19th century, we need to look through the micro-lens of one specific family, Thomas and Julia Richmond. Their lives perfectly capture the incredible, rapid transformation of the United States, from this quiet agricultural society to an absolute industrial powerhouse. By tracking the dates, the places, and the sheer, exhausting hard work that defined their era, we're going to see the Industrial Revolution not just as some abstract economic concept, but as an intensely lived human experience. It's a story that's literally brimming with high stakes, navigating heartbreaking loss, enduring grueling physical labor, and constantly reinventing themselves just to survive and thrive. Chapter 1. Crossing the Atlantic. Let's set the scene. Thomas was born into the small English village of Hilperton in 1848, which was a world deeply defined by his mother's hand-weaving and traditional manual labor. His father, James, worked as a coal merchant laborer, so this was a community completely anchored in traditional, slow-paced raftsmanship. But his ultimate destination across the ocean, Rhode Island, was a stark, almost unimaginable contrast. Rhode Island was just exploding with massive, steam-powered, mechanized mills. It was this chaotic, incredibly forward-looking environment where Thomas would eventually transition from being a British subject to a full-fledged American citizen. It's like a night-and-day difference, right? Actually, scratch that. It's more like stepping into a completely different universe. Amidst a massive wave of British emigration in 1856, an 8-year-old Thomas and his family embarked on a perilous, weeks-long Atlantic crossing. Just imagine for a second being 8 years old, stepping onto a crowded ship called the Osprey, and leaving literally everything you've ever known. You're traveling with your mother and 4 siblings, including a newborn infant, by the way, heading toward a completely unknown world. And the only reason you're even on that ship is because your father had to make the terrifying decision to travel ahead a full year earlier, working in a foreign land just to scrape together enough money to bring his family over. It is the classic, deeply courageous immigrant story of risk and absolute sacrifice. Moving on to Chapter 2, A Victorian Family Union. All right, flash forward to 1868. On a beautiful summer day in Elmville, Connecticut, Thomas, who is now 20 years old, marries Julia E. White, who was also 20. Now, this wasn't just a romance. It was a profound blending of cultures. Thomas, the English immigrant, was marrying into Julia's deep, established New England heritage, and they tied the knot right in the middle of the post-Civil War Reconstruction period. The entire country was furiously rebuilding, expanding its borders, and industrializing at breakneck speed. For a young immigrant to anchor himself to native-born roots during such a volatile time of national reinvention, that speaks volumes about his assimilation. This single day marked the beginning of a remarkable partnership that would span nearly half a century. 9. That is the number of children Thomas and Julia welcomed into their home over the next 20 years, creating this massive, bustling Victorian-era household. You truly have to marvel at the sheer organizational skill and the physical endurance it took to run a household of 11 people back in the late 19th century. Remember, this was an era before electricity, before indoor plumbing was even standard, before any modern conveniences. Julia managed this extraordinary domestic life, steering a huge family through a time of rapid technological and social changes, making countless daily sacrifices just to keep everyone fed, clothed, and cared for. But, the immense joy of this large family was matched only by the really sobering reality of 19th century mortality rates. While 5 of their children, Anne, Grace, Emily, Alma, and Edwin, survived them, Thomas and Julia endured the kind of heartbreak that was sadly all too common for families back then. They lost their young son Frederick when he was just 5 years old, and tragically they actually outlived 3 of their adult sons, Charles, James, and Everett. Yet, through all of this profound, unimaginable loss, their family bonds remained incredibly strong and tight-knit. They leaned on each other to survive the kind of tragedies that very often fractured lesser families. Which brings us to Chapter 3, Mastering the Textile Mills. Professionally, Thomas became recognized as one of the finest woolen carders in all of New England. So what exactly is a woolen carder? Well, it's a highly skilled textile worker overseeing the intricate first steps of preparing and untangling raw wool into yarn so it can be woven. Untangling raw wool by machine was incredibly difficult, dangerous work that required laser precision and a deep understanding of the materials. And there is a beautiful, almost poetic connection here. Thomas rose to the absolute top of his field in these massive mechanized mills without any formal technical education whatsoever. His success was a direct nod to his mother's lifelong work as a traditional hand weaver back in England. He basically mechanized the very craft she had done by hand. And this wasn't a stationary life. If we trace their geographic journey across New England, it shows a constant chase for changing economic opportunities in the booming textile industry. From the coastal town of Stonington in 1870, back to Killingly, then up to the industrial boom in Leominster, Massachusetts, and eventually settling in the thriving mill town of Putnam, Connecticut. Much like gig workers or ambitious corporate climbers today who constantly uproot and relocate for the next big opportunity, families in this era had to be fiercely adaptable. They couldn't just settle down and expect the work to stay. They packed up their lives time and time again, following the industrial development just to secure their livelihoods. By his 20s, Thomas wasn't just working the machines, he was an overseer. It is absolutely astounding how rapidly this young immigrant adapted to manage hundreds of workers and highly complex machinery. He even joined the National Association of Woolen and Worsted Overseers, which was this professional network that kept him at the absolute cutting edge of the industry. He lived right through the massive transition from older water-powered mill operations to these colossal coal-fired steam-powered factories. Overseeing that technological leap required an incredible intellect and just an unyielding work ethic. Next up, Chapter 4, Citizenship and Community Life. Then we hit September 10, 1890. On this profound day, Thomas stood in a Putnam courtroom and officially embraced the American dream. After 34 years of living, working, and building a family in the United States, he formally renounced his allegiance to Queen Victoria. The court records actually note that it had been his intention to become a citizen ever since he arrived as a minor. That 34-year wait gave immense weight to the moment he finally swore to support the Constitution of the United States. It was a massive emotional and political transition that officially cemented the identity he'd been building his entire life. But it wasn't all just factory work and politics. Beyond the mill walls, Thomas and Julia anchored themselves deeply into the spiritual and civic life of their towns, particularly at St. Philip's Episcopal Church. You see, during the industrial era, the local church wasn't just a place of worship. It served as the primary social safety net and the cultural hub for these hardworking communities. Together, Thomas and Julia wove a rich musical legacy there. Thomas served as the choir director, and Julia was an incredibly accomplished pianist and organist. They were the cultural heartbeat of their community. Their contributions were so vital and cherished that after Thomas passed, a memorial plaque was placed in the church recognizing his excellent work, and a lecture Bible was donated for public readings in Julia's memory. Finally, we arrive at Chapter 5, A Lasting American Legacy. We're in 1917 now, on the eve of World War I, and just 4 years after his beloved Julia passed away from breast cancer, Thomas battled a devastating illness, pernicious anemia. This is a serious blood disorder that prevents the body from producing healthy red blood cells. Now today, it's easily treated with vitamin B12, but back in the early 20th century, it was poorly understood and essentially incurable. There is a deep, agonizing tragedy here. A man who had built his entire life, his entire career, and his family on sheer physical strength and endurance was slowly taken down by extreme weakness and fatigue. I absolutely love this quote from his obituary because it beautifully captures his lifelong resilience. It noted that his spirit of goodwill and his affable disposition never faded, even in his final days. Consider the immense physical toll of his illness, yet he maintained a warmth and a kindness that struck everyone around him. He relocated to Massachusetts in his final months to be cared for by his daughter Annie, surrounded, fittingly, by the very family he had worked his entire life to build and protect. $509.27. When his estate was finalized in 1918, his worldly assets, including a $100 piano and his bank savings, totaled a very modest $509. In today's money, that's roughly $10,000. But listen, this should absolutely not be seen as a lack of success. In the industrial era, true wealth for the working class wasn't hoarded away in massive bank accounts. It was invested entirely in survival, in meaningful property like that piano to fill a home with music, and in the incredibly expensive feat of raising a massive family. It's a profound commentary on the nature of working class wealth. Because his real legacy, it wasn't financial wealth at all. It was the enduring human heritage he and Julia built together. They left behind over 20 grandchildren. The transition from a scared 8-year-old boy on a crowded immigrant ship to the patriarch of a sprawling, deeply established American family is nothing short of incredible. They passed down their core values, a relentless, unbreakable work ethic, unwavering family loyalty, and a deep, deep devotion to uplifting their community. Their story reminds us that every single generation has the power to weave something lasting, leaving us to wonder what legacy we are creating today. Thomas and Julia Richmond were just two people, but through their daily choices, their endless labor, their deep love, and their fierce resilience through absolute tragedy, they quite literally became part of the fabric of America. So, looking at the life they built, ask yourself, what threads are you weaving into the tapestry of your own family's history?